You think you can just evict me because I'm black? Okay, let's take this to court. That was all he said, calm, measured, looking his landlord dead in the eye while holding the eviction notice with 2 fingers like it was trash. What that smug landlord didn't know was that this quiet tenant was actually a top legal counsel for the very company that owned half the buildings in the city. And when he walked into the courtroom, he wasn't just fighting for himself. He was about to dismantle an entire system of discrimination with one case. This isn't just a story about an eviction. It's a story about power, silence, and the exact moment the system turned on itself. If you think you know how this ends, think again. Stay with us, because what happens when that courtroom door opens will leave you speechless. David Brooks didn't look like someone who belonged in a $1,400 a month apartment in Briarwood Heights, not according to the unspoken rules of its residents. He was 34, black, soft-spoken, always dressed sharp in tailored suits and polished shoes, and drove a modest gray sedan with DC plates. To outsiders, he was just another young professional, maybe a mid-level manager trying to climb the corporate ladder. But David wasn't climbing any ladders. He was the ladder. An Ivy League graduate with degrees from both Harvard and Yale, he was a licensed attorney and corporate legal strategist working for Raven and Locke LLP, a firm so powerful it handled the litigation for over 30 Fortune 500 companies. His specialty? Real estate law. His role? Led counsel for acquisitions and compliance. What he didn't advertise. Raven and Locke was also one of the principal stakeholders in Henson Properties, the very company that owned Briarwood Heights. And yet, he didn't live like a man of wealth. He chose that apartment not for luxury, but for anonymity. After a decade of high-stakes cases and boardroom warfare, David needed peace. He found the unit quietly through a listing, no agent, no negotiation. Moved in with nothing but books, suits, and a French press. He didn't tell the neighbors his job. He didn't post photos online. And he especially didn't let on that the same company cashing rent checks from Barry Henson, the landlord, was partially owned by the firm David worked for. David wasn't hiding. He was watching. From the moment he moved in, Barry Henson didn't like him. Barry was in his late 50s, with slick-back gray hair and a condescending smirk always clinging to his lips like stale cologne. He had that, "I know you're kind" energy without ever needing to say it. The first day David arrived, Barry looked him over, glanced at the moving truck, mostly filled with books and legal boxes, and said, "Didn't expect someone like you to take this unit. Thought you'd want something a little louder." David smiled. "Quiet is good." Barry gave a thin grin. "Just so we're clear, we don't tolerate late payments, disturbances, or any trouble." Understood. From that point on, David received more surprise inspections in 6 months than most tenants did in 3 years. Barry would show up unannounced, citing routine checks, often while David was working remotely in his home office. "You got a home business running in there?" Barry once asked, stepping over David's rug with his muddy boots. "No, I work in corporate law." Barry raised an eyebrow like he didn't believe a word. "Well, keep it quiet. Don't need the neighbors getting the wrong idea." David nodded, mentally documenting the time, date, and tone. He never snapped back. Never gave Barry what he wanted, a reason. He just filed every instance away like evidence, quietly assembling a portfolio of prejudice. Things escalated when David's younger cousin Marcus visited one weekend. Marcus, a college junior from Atlanta, came up to stay for a couple of days. On the second night, Barry knocked on the door. "I got a complaint about noise," he said flatly. David blinked. "It's just me and my cousin. We've been watching Netflix with subtitles on. No volume." "Well," Barry sniffed, glancing inside. "Maybe it's not the volume. It's the traffic. I don't want people thinking this is some kind of party house." "2 people isn't a party," David replied coolly. Barry's eyes narrowed. "Let's not get cute." David didn't say anything. He just looked at him with that quiet stare that Barry couldn't understand. One that didn't flinch, didn't argue, didn't yield. The kind of stare that made a man like Barry feel seen and small. The next week, David received his first violation notice, excessive foot traffic, unapproved guest. The week after that, noise complaint, 10:45 p.m. Then, failure to properly dispose of recyclables. Each notice more ridiculous than the last. David kept everyone. 3 months later, on a rainy Friday, David returned from court to find something taped to his front door, an eviction notice. "You are hereby notified to vacate the premises within 14 days due to repeated violations of lease terms and disturbances reported by neighboring tenants." No hearing. No prior mediation. No due process. Just an abrupt, arrogant decision written in thick ink and smug certainty. David pulled the paper down, walked through the drizzle, and headed straight to the leasing office. Barry sat behind the desk, sipping cheap coffee and watching a baseball game on his dusty monitor. "You posted this?" David asked, holding up the notice. Barry didn't look up. "Yeah, I did." "You know it's all baseless." Barry finally turned, feigning confusion. "Really? I've got multiple complaints. Tenants have been nervous. I've got to protect the community." David didn't flinch. No complaints were ever filed. No hearings. No citations from city housing. Barry shrugged. "My property. My rules." David held his gaze. "You think you can just evict me because I'm black?" Barry smirked. "I think you're a troublemaker who doesn't fit in." David's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed even. "Okay, let's take this to court." Barry let out a dry chuckle. "Be my guest." David nodded slowly. "I will." He turned and walked out into the rain, the eviction notice tucked under one arm, his free hand slipping into his coat pocket to retrieve his phone. He opened a folder marked B. Hinson, Tenant Interactions. Inside were files, photos, scanned notes, timestamps, emails, months of material. And tomorrow morning, those documents would become part of an official legal filing. Barry had just declared war, and he had no idea he was going up against the general. That night, David didn't sleep. He didn't need to. He spent 5 hours assembling his case, one he had anticipated might come, sooner or later. He documented every violation of the Fair Housing Act, every racial microaggression, every forged complaint. By morning, he had a 40-page claim with supporting exhibits ready to file with the Cook County Housing Court. But that wasn't all. He also drafted a confidential memo to the board of Henson Properties, the holding company that oversaw the apartment's ownership. The subject line was simple: internal legal action imminent, breach of ethics by site manager. Attached were 5 exhibits and one chilling line: Mr. Barry Henson is acting in a manner inconsistent with company DI standards, investor commitments, and federal housing law. His conduct exposes the firm to liability. Formal response requested within 72 hours. Signed, David A. Brooks, ESQ Raven and Locke LLP, Senior Counsel, Real Estate Compliance. By Monday, Barry would have more than a tenant issue. He would have a corporate legal crisis. But David wasn't doing this for revenge. He didn't want Barry fired or ruined. What David wanted, what he demanded, was justice. A legal precedent. A signal that quiet tenants are not weak. That discrimination dressed in bureaucracy still bleeds when cut. And Barry was about to learn that sometimes the people you think are beneath you are the ones holding the floor you stand on. Don't blink. Because in the next segment, the pressure rises, and Barry starts to realize the man he tried to evict might be the one who owns the courtroom. Stay with us. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Barry Henson had evicted dozens of tenants before. Some for legitimate reasons, others not so much. A noise complaint here, a paperwork technicality there. It wasn't hard when you were the one holding the keys. And when it came to certain tenants, especially the ones who made him uncomfortable just by existing, Barry had developed his own quiet method: isolate, intimidate, evict. It always worked. So when David Brooks walked out of his office that rainy day, calm but direct, Barry didn't blink. He didn't bother checking David's file. He didn't even remember where David worked. To Barry, he was just another uppity type playing smart. The kind who folds their arms and talks slow like they're in charge of something. Barry had seen it before, and it always ended the same. But this time it wouldn't, because David didn't go home in panic. He didn't call friends for sympathy. He went to work. By Sunday evening, a quiet storm was brewing beneath Barry's feet. In an office on the 31st floor of the Lucent building in downtown Chicago, David sat under the warm glow of legal texts, spreadsheets, scanned documents, and something Barry had never seen coming: precision. He cross-referenced every tenant complaint filed at Briarwood Heights over the last 5 years. He built a timeline showing a disproportionate number of citations issued to tenants of color, particularly young black men. He identified patterns in Barry's behavior: early terminations, surprise inspections, falsified maintenance claims, and matched them to the demographic data. It wasn't just anecdotal. It was statistical. Then came the kicker. David requested an internal property audit through a back channel at Raven and Locke, citing preliminary red flags regarding discriminatory housing practices. Since his firm had advisory oversight over Henson properties, the audit couldn't be ignored. Barry, meanwhile, remained oblivious. On Monday morning, he strutted through the courtyard, nodding at elderly tenants and pausing to chat with two white residents watering their gardenias. When he saw David's apartment door still shut, he chuckled. Guess he got the message. What Barry didn't know was that David wasn't hiding. He was documenting. That same morning, David filed two separate motions in housing court. Motion to dismiss eviction for lack of cause. Civil claim for racial discrimination, retaliation, and constructive harassment. The case was officially Brooks versus Henson Properties, scheduled for preliminary hearing in 2 weeks. Barry received the court summons on Wednesday. He laughed at first, tossed the envelope on his cluttered desk, and muttered, "He's really going for it, huh?" But when he flipped through the pages and saw the detail, the legal formatting, and the firm name Raven and Locke LLP in the letterhead attached as affiliated counsel, something in his stomach turned cold. The next day, Barry tried calling the firm's property management liaison, only to be told curtly, "Due to conflict of interest concerns, we cannot discuss ongoing litigation with individual site managers. Please refer all questions to legal." That's when the weight started to settle in. He sent a panicked email to his regional supervisor. "We may have a situation. Tenant filed something. Claims discrimination. Lawyer or something. Name's David Brooks." The reply came hours later. "Wait, David A. Brooks? Are you serious? He's our legal counsel, Barry. He works with Raven. He sits in on our compliance reviews." Barry felt the blood drain from his face. But the real unraveling hadn't even begun. By Friday, a quiet memo had circulated within Henson Properties' senior boardroom. The subject line read, "Emergency review. Conflict between site manager Barry Henson and legal counsel David Brooks." Attached were security camera stills showing Barry entering David's apartment without permission on 3 separate occasions. Another image showed Barry tossing a folded document, later identified as the eviction notice, at David's front door like litter. And then there was Exhibit C, a text message Barry had sent to another employee months prior. "Need to keep this place clean. Don't want it turning into the South Side." Followed by, "Already got that suit in 3B. Hope he doesn't bring more of his cousins." The board wasn't just disturbed. They were furious. David, however, remained silent. He didn't gloat, didn't issue a press release. He continued his work at the firm, attended meetings, and carried on like nothing was brewing. But behind the scenes, Barry's name was being discussed in boardrooms, not for his loyalty, but for being a liability. And then, the media caught wind. A small legal blog picked up the court filing and ran the headline, "Tenant sues landlord for discrimination. Turns out he's the company's top lawyer." The story went viral within 24 hours. Local news outlets wanted statements. Housing activists began sharing David's name. Former tenants of Barry's properties started reaching out, claiming similar mistreatment. Barry's phone rang off the hook. Angry calls, voicemails from corporate, messages from his lawyer telling him to not speak to anyone. And still, David didn't make a sound. He didn't need to, because Barry had already screamed his guilt in every careless act. But the part that truly terrified Barry came late Sunday night, in the form of a formal board summons. The subject, Notice of Administrative Hearing, Conduct Review of Site Manager Barry Henson. The date? Same morning as his eviction court appearance. Now, Barry was facing 2 hearings in one day, one in court, the other with the people who controlled his salary, title, and retirement. And in both rooms, David Brooks would be sitting across from him. Only now, Barry was realizing what everyone else already knew. He hadn't picked a fight with a tenant. He'd challenged a tactician. And the game he thought he controlled? David had already rewritten the rules. In the next segment, the courtroom door opens, and Barry finds out who David really is. The reveal is brutal. You won't believe who walks in with him. Stay tuned. The reckoning begins. Barry Henson adjusted his ill-fitting navy blazer for the 3rd time that morning. It bunched uncomfortably at the shoulders, like it hadn't been worn since a cousin's funeral. He looked in the rearview mirror of his battered pickup truck and practiced his lines one last time. "This is a case of a disruptive tenant trying to play the race card. I run a clean property. That's all." He repeated it like a prayer. His hands were sweating. The Cook County Housing Court was nothing fancy, just a brick building tucked between a strip mall and a DMV office, But this morning, it felt like a coliseum. Barry walked in with the swagger of someone who had done this dance before. He'd brought along a young, bored-looking lawyer from a low-cost firm who barely skimmed the file before stepping into the courtroom. What Barry didn't notice at first was the change in energy. The clerk at the bench looked sharper than usual. The opposing side of the courtroom wasn't empty. 3 people in tailored suits were seated already, calmly reviewing thick folders. One of them stood when Barry entered. David Brooks. But this wasn't the David Barry knew. Gone was the quiet tenant in joggers and hoodies. This David wore a gray custom-cut 3-piece suit, a sleek silver tie bar, and polished black Oxfords that clicked against the tile as he approached the bench with the ease of a man who'd done it 1,000 times. Barry froze mid-step. His eyes flicked from David to the stack of legal pads, then to the embossed binder that read, Brooks versus Henson, Evidence Submission, in Raven and Locke's gold-lettered branding. Is that? Barry whispered to his attorney. The attorney frowned. Wait a second. David Brooks? You didn't say it was that David Brooks. Barry turned pale. The judge entered. Everyone stood. Good morning. This is case number 739B, Brooks versus Henson Properties. Tenant initiated countersuit in response to eviction proceedings. All parties present. David's voice rang out, calm and practiced. Yes, Your Honor. David Brooks, representing myself as plaintiff. Barry's attorney stumbled forward. Thomas Bell, representing defendant Barry Henson. The judge nodded. Very well. Mr. Brooks, would you like to begin? David stood, buttoned his blazer with quiet precision, and stepped forward. Your Honor, the eviction against me was not only unlawful, it was targeted, retaliatory, and racially motivated. I will present evidence today of sustained harassment, fabricated complaints, illegal entry, and written documentation containing racially coded language used by Mr. Henson in reference to myself and other tenants of color. A hush fell over the courtroom. Barry leaned toward his attorney, voice hoarse. He can't prove that. He's bluffing. David opened his binder. Exhibit A, rental payment receipts, on time, every month. Exhibit B, internal surveillance footage showing no foot traffic violations. Exhibit C, a maintenance log from Henson Properties that shows my unit had more inspections than any other apartment, 9 and 4 months. Exhibit D, a sworn affidavit from a neighboring tenant who heard Mr. Henson say, quote, "Gotta keep these people from turning this place into South Side trash." And finally, Exhibit E, a signed complaint sent to his superior that was buried, until now. The judge looked at Barry. Mr. Henson, do you wish to respond to these claims? Barry stood, voice cracking. This is a misunderstanding. I treat all tenants the same. David didn't flinch. You don't. And you never did. The next 30 minutes unfolded like a slow-motion demolition. David moved through the exhibits like a surgeon, calm, methodical, slicing away at Barry's defense with precision. Every question he asked, every document he produced, further cornered Barry into a narrative of systemic bias and neglect. The final blow came when David revealed an email thread between Barry and another property manager, obtained through corporate discovery. In it, Barry wrote, "He's trouble. Thinks he's smarter than everyone. I don't want to wait until he brings in more of his kind. We'll nip this in the bud." Gasps echoed from the gallery. Barry's attorney buried his face in his hands. The judge cleared his throat. "We'll take a short recess. But Mr. Henson, I suggest you prepare for a very different outcome than the one you were expecting." Outside in the hallway, Barry sat hunched on a bench, sweat dripping down his forehead. For the first time, he understood. This wasn't a tenant dispute. This was a reckoning. And the man he tried to silence had walked into the courtroom not as a tenant, not even as a lawyer, but as the voice of every tenant Barry had ever mistreated and gotten away with it. David stood nearby, arms crossed, eyes calm. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't gloating. He was waiting for justice to catch up. But the courtroom is only half the story. In the next segment, the fallout spreads like wildfire. The boardroom awaits, and the decision they make will end someone's career. Don't miss it. The courtroom reconvened 15 minutes later, but something had shifted. Barry Henson, once so smug and confident, now looked like a man unraveling at the seams. His tie was askew, his collar damp with sweat. Meanwhile, David Brooks sat poised, hands folded, gaze steady. as if he weren't in court defending himself, but presiding over a slow-burning reckoning. The judge resumed. "Mr. Brooks, you may continue with your presentation." David stood and approached the monitor at the center of the courtroom. A clerk dimmed the lights slightly as David connected a thumb drive. "This," David began, "is a timeline of events recorded over the past 5 months." On screen, a digital timeline appeared, clean, color-coded, devastatingly detailed. "Here are timestamps of each violation notice I receive," David continued. "Now, cross-referenced with internal security footage from my own camera, legally placed inside my unit facing the door." With a tap of the remote, the footage played. First clip, Barry taping a notice on the door. Excessive foot traffic, even though the footage showed David home alone that entire evening. Second clip, Barry entering the apartment without knocking, clipboard in hand, with no work order and no emergency. David's voice could be heard calmly asking, "Didn't we agree to 24-hour notice?" Barry's voice replied, "Just checking in. You never know what people bring into these places." A woman in the back row of the courtroom gasped. David turned back to the judge. 3 such entries, all unauthorized. Then came the internal emails. With another click, David projected a redacted chain of emails between Barry and property staff. In one message, Barry wrote, "Keep an eye on 3B. I don't like the way he looks at me. Too slick. Probably one of those social justice types." And in another, "Get him out before he starts trouble. This place is for decent people." The judge shifted uncomfortably in his chair. David's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "This isn't just harassment, Your Honor. It's targeted racial discrimination disguised as routine enforcement. It's a calculated attempt to make me feel unsafe, unwelcome, and unworthy of staying in my own home." Barry's attorney, flustered and red-faced, attempted a half-hearted objection. "Your Honor, these are circumstantial interpretations." The judge cut him off. Objection overruled. "Mr. Brooks, please continue." David tapped a final file, Exhibit G, Statistical Analysis. "This chart," he explained, "was compiled from internal records from Henson Properties, accessed through my firm's discovery rights. It compares the frequency of violation notices issued across tenants of different ethnicities." The graph was damning. Tenants of color, though only comprising 22% of the complex population, received over 71% of all violation notices in the past 2 years. David paused. "And the person who issued 94% of those notices?" He turned to face Barry. "Mr. Henson, you could have heard a pin drop." Barry looked like he wanted to disappear into the vinyl flooring. The judge glanced at the data, then back at Barry. "Mr. Henson, do you have any response to this evidence?" Barry's mouth opened, but no words came. David stepped back, his closing statement concise and cutting. "I moved into Briarwood Heights for peace. I paid rent early, caused no disturbances, brought no complaints. Yet I was treated like a threat, like an outsider, because of the color of my skin. Mr. Henson's behavior isn't just unethical. It's illegal. And worse, it's habitual." He let the silence linger. The judge looked over his notes, then spoke firmly. "The court finds that Mr. Brooks was targeted with malicious intent and discriminatory practice. The eviction is not only void, it is declared retaliatory and unlawful. Damages will be assessed after review, and a referral will be made to the Cook County Human Rights Commission for further investigation." Barry collapsed into his chair, but David wasn't finished yet. He calmly turned to the court clerk and handed her a sealed envelope. "This is a formal complaint, to be forwarded to the Illinois Department of Housing. It contains the names of 4 additional former tenants who have reached out since this case began." And then, with calculated timing, he looked to the back of the courtroom, where 2 sharply dressed individuals had just entered. "Also present today," David added, "are representatives from Raven and Locke LLP's Oversight Division and Henson Properties Executive Board." The judge blinked. "Excuse me." David nodded. "They've been made aware of the conflict and will be handling administrative consequences internally." Barry spun around in his seat, jaw open, watching as the 2 executives silently took notes. He realized then, this wasn't just about a court verdict. His job, his career, his entire legacy was hanging in the balance. Outside the courthouse, news vans had started to gather. Word had spread. David declined interviews, offering only a single sentence to one reporter. Justice doesn't always arrive with noise. Sometimes it walks in silently and rewrites the rules. Then he walked off. But the courtroom is only the beginning. In the next segment, the corporate boardroom takes center stage, and Barry Henson is about to face consequences he never imagined. You won't want to miss what's waiting behind that conference room door. It was 8:47 a.m. when Barry Henson stepped into the downtown headquarters of Henson Properties, escorted by a junior HR associate who didn't say a word the entire elevator ride. The elevator dinged at the 23rd floor, executive review. Barry swallowed hard. He'd spent the night in a haze, sleepless, scrolling through online articles about the trial, watching his name get dragged through local forums, legal blogs, and even real estate watchdog groups. On Twitter, a hashtag had begun trending. Hashtag Tenant versus Tyrant. And the photo? That haunting shot of David walking calmly out of the courthouse, surrounded by reporters but untouched by the chaos. It was already iconic. Barry's hands trembled as he walked into the glass-walled boardroom. Seated at the long table were 6 members of the company's executive committee. 4 men, 2 women, all dressed in black suits with folders neatly stacked in front of them. The room was cold, and not just from the AC. At the head of the table sat Elaine Price, Chief Compliance Officer and one of the most feared women in the Chicago real estate sector. "Mr. Henson," she said without looking up, "take a seat." Barry obeyed. His voice stuck somewhere between his chest and his pride. Elaine opened a thin folder, slid it forward, and spoke with surgical clarity. "This document outlines our internal review. It includes findings from the legal department, corporate ethics, and external counsel. I suggest you read it before we begin." Barry scanned the first few lines and instantly regretted it. Subject found to have violated DEI standards, falsified housing violations, and demonstrated patterns of racial profiling over a documented period of 22 months. It was over 10 pages long. "We've also received a formal letter of concern from Raven and Locke," Elaine continued, "citing not only your misconduct toward Mr. Brooks, but the risk you've exposed this company to, including potential lawsuits from former tenants now coming forward." Barry looked up. "I didn't mean for this to get out of hand. I was just protecting the property." Elaine's eyes narrowed. "Protecting it from whom?" Barry stammered. "Look, I might have made mistakes, but David Brooks, he ambushed me. He never said who he was." "That's not how justice works, Mr. Henson," she said sharply. "You don't get to discriminate just because someone didn't disclose their resume." There was a pause. Then one of the board members spoke. "We took a vote this morning. Effective immediately, you are relieved of all site management responsibilities. Your severance package is rescinded. Your pension is under review. And the company will not provide legal defense in any civil suits filed moving forward." Barry's mouth opened, but no words came out. He looked around the room, hoping someone, anyone, would come to his defense. No one did. He stood slowly. The scrape of his chair was the loudest sound in the room. "Do you have anything you'd like to say?" Elaine asked. Barry blinked. "Yeah, tell him. Tell Brooks he set me up." Elaine closed her folder. "He didn't set you up. You set yourself up. All he did was refuse to be silent." Meanwhile, across the city, David sat in his office overlooking Lake Michigan. The sun poured through the glass as he read a brief update from Henson Properties' executive board. One sentence stood out. "Corrective action has been taken. Mr. Henson has been formally dismissed and disqualified from future property management roles within our company and affiliates." David exhaled, not with satisfaction, but with resolve. He'd won. But this wasn't about personal victory. It was about precedent. The kind that told every landlord watching, every tenant suffering in silence, that the system could be challenged and it could be forced to answer. Later that week, David returned to Briarwood Heights, not as a tenant, but as a guest speaker. A community forum had been organized in the courtyard. Local reporters came. Housing rights advocates were there. A few tenants from neighboring buildings showed up too. Some curious, some angry, some inspired. David took the mic under a cloudy sky and addressed the crowd. "Some people asked me why I didn't just move out, why I didn't let it go. But the truth is, when you're silent in the face of injustice, you're not protecting your peace. You're just postponing the next victim." The crowd nodded. A few clapped. One elderly woman wiped a tear from her cheek. "We're not asking for special treatment," David continued. "We're asking for equal footing. For a home where you don't have to justify your presence. where skin color isn't a lease liability. His words struck deeper than any court ruling. And when he stepped down, people didn't just thank him. They asked what they could do next, how they could report harassment, how they could organize, how they could fight back too. The verdict may have ended in a courtroom, but the movement? It had just begun. In the final segment, discover how David's quiet stand transforms an entire housing system, and why sometimes justice doesn't come from shouting, but from showing up with the truth. Don't miss the ending. It's the part that changes everything. 3 months had passed since the verdict, but the ripples were only growing wider. Barry Henson had vanished from the property management world, his name quietly scrubbed from websites, contracts, and business listings. He faced additional civil suits from former tenants, most of whom were people of color who now had a powerful legal precedent and a name to cite: Brooks versus Henson Properties. But David Brooks didn't stick around for the headlines. He declined interviews. He ignored offers for book deals and podcasts. When a national news anchor asked him to fly to New York for a sit-down interview, he replied simply, "I didn't do it to be famous. I did it so the next person wouldn't have to fight this hard just to keep a roof over their head." Instead, David focused on something deeper, something lasting. He returned to work at Raven and Locke, but with a new initiative, a pro bono housing rights division. What began as an internal proposal soon became a fully funded legal clinic, staffed with 6 attorneys, 3 interns, and a rotating pool of volunteers. Their mission: represent tenants of color facing unlawful eviction, discrimination, or harassment, free of charge. They called it Project Equal Roof. David didn't put his name on it, but everyone in the office knew whose fire had started the movement. In the months that followed, changes rippled through the system. The city council passed a new ordinance requiring body cam footage for any landlord-entered unit without tenant presence. Henson Properties instituted a mandatory anti-bias certification for all managers. The Illinois Department of Human Rights reported a 41% increase in housing discrimination complaints, most citing David's case as their motivator. Law schools invited him to guest lecture, not on legal theory, but on courage in practice. And in the midst of it all, David kept living quietly. The same apartment, the same morning run, the same black coffee. Only now, when he passed his neighbors, they didn't look away, they nodded, smiled, thanked him. Even the building itself felt different. Where silence once lingered in the hallways, now there was laughter, greetings, children playing without fear. Tenants began holding monthly meetings to share concerns and educate each other on their rights. One tenant even framed a copy of the court decision and hung it on the community board with a sticky note: "So we never forget we have power." One crisp autumn afternoon, David sat alone on a bench outside the neighborhood park, sipping coffee. A young man, early 20s, nervous posture, approached him. "Mr. Brooks?" David looked up. "Yes. I just wanted to thank you. My mom, she went through something like what you did, but she didn't have the tools. She just moved out." David nodded, quiet. The young man hesitated. "I'm in my 2nd year at Northwestern, studying law. I wasn't sure if I belonged. But after watching what you did..." His voice trailed off. David smiled, then reached into his briefcase, pulled out a business card. "Come intern with us. We'll make sure you're not just in the room. You'll know how to change it." The young man stared at the card like it was a key. That evening, David returned home and passed the door where the eviction notice had once hung. It was just a door now. Ordinary. Peaceful. He unlocked it, stepped inside, and turned off his phone. No headlines. No cameras. Just quiet justice. Because for David Brooks, this was never about revenge. It was about legacy. A legacy that didn't shout. It proved. A legacy not born in power, but in choosing to stand, even when no one expected you to. The law doesn't work because it's written, David once told his interns. It works when people decide to use it to protect those who've been ignored. And if that means going to war in a suit, so be it. This isn't just the end of a story. It's the beginning of a movement. If this inspired you, share it. Speak up. And remember, silence protects systems, but truth dismantles them. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories that challenge injustice and celebrate quiet strength. Because sometimes, the softest voice in the room is the one that changes everything. Long after the headlines faded and the trial transcripts were filed away, the case of Brooks versus Henson Properties lived on, not as a legal win, but as a turning point. A quiet spark that turned into a steady flame across housing courts, tenant advocacy groups, and boardrooms nationwide. It began with a phone call. A property management company in Houston contacted Raven and Locke requesting a full DI compliance audit of their operations. 2 days later, a firm in St. Louis did the same. Within 6 months, over 30 real estate holding companies voluntarily revised their internal policies after citing gaps exposed in the Brooks case. One CEO even admitted off record, "It wasn't the lawsuit that scared us. It was how surgical he was. It made us realize someone that prepared could live in any one of our buildings, and we'd never see it coming." Meanwhile, Project Equal Roof had become more than just a division at Raven and Locke. It expanded into a nonprofit with satellite offices in Detroit, Baltimore, and Oakland. Run by a rotating team of attorneys of color, many of them former tenants who'd once faced discrimination themselves, the project became a lighthouse for those drowning in a system too complex to fight alone. One evening, at a fundraising gala in downtown Chicago, the room fell silent when a former single mother took the mic. "I was evicted with my baby because my neighbor didn't like the way I looked. I didn't even know my rights. Then I found Project Equal Roof. They didn't just fight for me. They taught me how to fight for myself." She pointed to David sitting at the back table, dressed plainly as always, sipping tea. "He doesn't just win cases. He builds bridges. And now we walk on them." The applause lasted almost 5 minutes. David didn't take the stage. He just nodded and quietly excused himself when the room shifted to cocktails. In private, he lived the same way he always had. Simple, silent, strategic. But one new tradition had emerged. Every Sunday, he taught a free legal literacy class at a community center in Bronzeville. Open to anyone. No sign-up needed. The topic changed each week. How to read a lease, how to respond to an eviction notice, how to document racial bias. The room always filled. One afternoon, a teenage girl raised her hand and asked, "Why do you do this for free?" David smiled. "Because the law isn't just a sword, it's a shield. And you shouldn't have to be rich to hold one." His quiet resistance had changed the culture. Even city housing judges admitted it. One clerk told a reporter, "After that trial, landlords started bringing cleaner records. They knew the game had changed. And tenants? They stood taller. People who once feared retaliation now had a playbook. An example. A name. But what struck David the most wasn't the policy change, or the nonprofits, or the press. It was the letter he received one day from a 14-year-old boy in Atlanta. "Dear Mr. Brooks, my mom said we had to move because of our skin. Then she showed me your story. I want to be a lawyer too, so nobody can ever make her feel small again. Thank you for showing me how to fight without shouting." David folded the letter carefully, placed it in a small wooden box in his office drawer, and sat still for a long time. One rainy evening, as he walked home, he paused at the corner near a construction site. He saw a young black man in work clothes being questioned by a security guard. Loud voice, aggressive tone. David didn't raise his voice. He stepped forward, calmly showed his badge, and said, "I'm his counsel. Is there a problem?" The guard backed off immediately. The young man looked stunned. "I don't even know you," he whispered. David handed him a card. "That's okay. But if you ever need someone who does, now you have a name." In the end, David Brooks didn't change the world overnight. But he changed the rules. He turned silence into strategy, discrimination into documentation, and pain into power. And though the courtroom doors had long since closed, the echo of that moment, the moment he said, "You think you can just evict me because I'm black? Okay, let's take this to court," never stopped reverberating. Because justice doesn't always come crashing through the ceiling. Sometimes it just walks in through the front door, holding the lease in one hand and the law in the other. Not every hero wears a cape. Some walk quietly through life, not chasing fame, but standing their ground when injustice comes knocking. David Brooks didn't raise his voice. He didn't seek revenge. He did something far more terrifying to a system built on silence. He exposed it using the very law it tried to hide behind. This story reminds us that silence isn't always weakness. When used wisely, it becomes the sharpest weapon. Discrimination doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers through policies, glances, or false paperwork. Justice isn't just a personal victory. It's a signal, telling others they don't have to keep enduring what was once seen as unchangeable. Sometimes the most powerful revolution doesn't start with a riot. It starts with someone calmly saying, "No more." David didn't break the system with anger. He dismantled it with evidence, with preparation, with the decision to stay, fight, and claim the dignity he was always owed. You don't need power to create change. You just need the courage to stand, even when you stand alone. Because every time you refuse to stay silent in the face of injustice, you don't just change your own story, you rewrite the future for those who've never been heard. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Share it. Stand up. Speak out. Because the next David Brooks might be your neighbor, or your son, or you. Like, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of justice, truth, and the strength of quiet resistance.